I don't anticipate anything formal before next spring at the earliest, and that would kick off a rulemaking process, which is also public and provides many opportunities for further public input. So we are at the least several months out from anything formal.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that answer, Deputy Director Campion. Any other questions before we move on to our internal CAC discussion? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, just one more question. I'm wondering, environmental review and the CEQA compliance associated with, well, really everything outdoor, some mixed light, and even some indoor, depending on the type of land use or zoning designation that it occurs in, is going to require some environmental review, biotic resource assessments, and that. And I'm wondering if DCC has any interest in further exploring deferring to the environmental review at the county levels. And I say that because, state agencies aren't normally in the business of doing environmental review for licensees and applicants. And, before this came along, if you had the right ability and permission or licensure at the local level to do the activity you're doing on your property, then you really just submitted a license application to the state, depending on the agency, and received a license for that activity, provided the project fit within the regulatory parameters of that activity. And so, that could really save a tremendous amount of money by the state, not only in the number of employees that are required to do environmental review on the plethora of projects going on throughout the state, but also might support reducing the cost of licensure. And I know that, when this all started, the state wanted to be the lead on environmental review and make it a purely discretionary process. But I think there's opportunity now that with this long runway for us to examine deferring to local jurisdictions for environmental review if they so choose to do so. Just a thought. Thank you.
I have a few thoughts. I can go. In speaking, I guess, looking at these questions and thinking about the criteria that should be considered in evaluating fees, I'd just point to Proposition 64, I believe it's Section J in the findings and declarations, where it's explicitly talked about the value that California has on fostering a diverse scale economy where small and medium-sized businesses are able to thrive, and also to avoid incentivizing monopolistic behaviors. As legalization is rolled out, cultivators in particular, in terms of the supply chain, have been pretty, they've seen a lot of their revenue disappear. It's in pretty precipitous ways. So as you all probably know, the way that fees are assigned for cultivators is according to their size, not according to their revenue. For all of their license types, it's according to their revenue, not according to their size per se. So what this means is that the relative effective rate of the fees that cultivators have been paying has actually increased or is now proportionally much higher, from what my understanding is, than other parts of the supply chain. What this brings up for me is that there might be a need to recalibrate in rethinking this fee structure, how much relative fees are the effective rate are different licensees having to pay. I will also mention one other aspect of this, which is among cultivators too, whether you're the smallest size or largest size and everywhere in between. I think there's been some good analysis I'm sure that folks on the line will speak to, and something I've also seen in my own research is that that the fees end up being proportionally larger for the smallest than they are for the largest, and that particularly has to do with large licenses, their ability to add on more square footage at a nominal rate. So what this brings up is possible solutions I can imagine, ways thinking about either an absolute reduction for cultivators in terms of the fee amounts, thinking about a rebate according to actual revenue, or to think about indexing the fees to an average market rate for a pound, which may or may not be readily available through metric data and other indices. And finally, I'll just mention, I know this has been discussed in a lot of local context, is thinking about incentives for sustainability and ecological practices above and beyond what the requirements are for cultivation. I know that a lot of cultivators are taking those measures, but don't necessarily get any kind of incentive along the way. So thinking about potentially structuring that into the fee structure might be a fruitful direction to consider.
This is Member Heidelbach. I just want to echo some of Member Polson's points. I appreciate some of the items that he brought forward. And as Deputy Director Campion noted, this is a long road that we're going to be going down, but just a couple points I want to make, and that is that from the sense I'm getting from reading the discussion prompts is that DCC's responsibilities have broadened, which indicates that folks are looking to increase the fees. And while there's no, we're looking at a struggling industry right now. So when we talk about increasing fees, I worry about the sustainability of that. And then also just want to flag that a lot of these businesses, at least that we hear from, are struggling with not just state fees, but also the local fees that they are paying. And I do also want to just make one last note, and that is that I'm sensitive to the struggle of cultivation. I also want to see the smaller businesses, legacy folks survive and kind of move farther away from the monopolistic behavior. But I also want to flag that a lot of the retailers are struggling, but because of separate issues like taxing, pushing the taxes onto those folks. The cultivation tax obviously was rolled. And so some of the different parts of the supply chain are feeling the pinch from that, retailers being that. So there's no secret sauce here. There's a lot of different holes we can dive down, and there's no perfect fix, but I just want to add that to our conversation. Thanks.
I have a question for Jacqueline still, if she's still taking questions. Does metric get covered out of our license fee, the cost of metric, or does that come from the state excise tax? Who's paying for metrics, exorbitant costs?
Thanks for that question, Member Levine. Metric costs are part of license fees.
And so who's to justify their charges? And I mean, they basically have a monopoly over this and can charge whatever they want. So who's keeping them in check and assuring that we're not being overcharged and then that just being passed on to us in form of the license fees?
I very much appreciate that point and open to suggestions.
All right, I think that maybe some optics into it would be great so that publicly we all would be able to see what metric is charging and maybe come up with some sort of committee to see if that's justifiable, because clearly the license fees for renewal each year are extremely expensive. They basically calculate to 1% of gross sales, which is a lot, when you're talking about an industry that is, one, not profitable. Two, when you factor into the accounting 280E that disallows all of your write-offs other than the cost of goods. Let's say you had an EBITDA of 10%, like a normal business. When you factor in 280E, now you're down at 5%. And then this license fee takes one of those percent. So you're back, now you're down at 4%. And a 10% EBITDA cannabis business right now would be crushing it. It's most people's EBITDA is in the negative. So when you're talking about 1%, that's a lot. And where does it go is really the question. If Metric has taken a big portion of that, I think that we should look at what their fees are and how do you renegotiate that fee structure. I know it's a contract, so I don't know that that's even possible.
Thank you, Member Levine, for those comments. I think that's something that we need to certainly look into as we look at this fee structuring. And I think that these are exactly the types of conversations and the points that is critical to bring up at this time so that we can look at all avenues. In my opinion, we can look at all avenues. Let's put everything on the table and see how we can make this as fair and equitable across the entire supply chain. You know, I know that there are some license types that take that have larger burdens on a percentage of their business for the license fees. And then there are other segments of the business of the licenses that, for example, with nursery and processing that are flat rates that aren't actually tiered on size. And so I think that, you know, there's a variety of options that we should be able to look at to, you know, looking at the DCC as a business also, and looking at how do we continue to generate the revenue that they need to operate in order to run our licensed markets, in addition to, you know, having that clarity and oversight of some of these agreements and contracts that we're in to make sure that we're evaluating our dollars that are being best spent.
Oh, I agree with the need, but just to take into perspective, just one of my license fees is $100,000 for my micro business. And with that money, you could hire a full-time person to follow us around and make sure that we're compliant, like literally here every day tracking our metric movement and all of that. So that's where I'm finding it hard to understand how the cost is justified. I'm fine to move on to further discussion, but you know, just understanding maybe some more clarity into where this money's being spent and how do we do it more efficiently.
One follow-up question I have too is about you mentioned that all the DCC's operational funds come from fees, but can you differentiate between what support then comes from taxes, or how? I know there's a whole tiers of or taxes.
Member Polson, I'll just be really brief with my response. As I mentioned in my remarks, DCC is entirely funded by the licensing fees. That was part of the agreement when this organization was first set up. And taxes do not currently support department operations at all. The uses for the tax revenue are outlined in statute, and that does not include DCC operations.
I can share some thoughts. This is Member Beck. So let's see. So currently, state law requires cannabis fees to cover DCC costs to provide oversight for the industry. They are scaled according to the website so that larger businesses pay more and allow individuals who are negatively impacted by the criminalization of cannabis to apply for license fee waivers. So that's baked in currently. I do think it's appropriate exercise right now to evaluate the options to restructure the license fees, but as Member Heidelbach mentioned, I am sensitive right now to increasing costs. So, if there's an opportunity to ensure that the fees are right-sized for the services delivered, that seems appropriate. I think one of the first steps in determining if fees are fair and equitable would be to conduct some sort of program and staff efficiency study, followed by fee studies to evaluate, the cost of administrating the program and issuing licenses. There's always an opportunity to identify inefficiencies in a program and improve those processes. On the DCC website, there on the application and license fees webpage, there it does state that the application and license fees are based on the findings of economists who studied the cannabis industry in California and recommended fee amounts. So I think that goes to maybe what Deputy Director Campion was saying earlier about the origin of the fees back in 2017. So it might be interesting to look at that study. I don't know if there's if the DCC is considering reinitiating this research, but it does seem like it would be timely to look back at that and then see if there's some fee studies that can be done going forward. I think, some of the criteria to determine what's fair and equitable going forward, is, do the fees align with the size and revenue of an operation? Obviously, we'd like to know there should be transparency if the fee calculation should be available and whether these, we want the fees to remain competitive, but the fees should cover the cost, but we also want to make sure that our businesses are able to stay competitive. So those are just a couple quick thoughts. But I do think that there's an opportunity. I'm sorry, I didn't catch who said this earlier, but where can we reduce costs? So if we're going to increase the licensing fees, are there other opportunities to reduce costs, and whether that's prioritizing the reduction of metric tags, right? So there could be a decrease in metric costs, and we heard some public commenters asking that the recommendation be made that be prioritized for spring plantings or prior to spring 2025 plantings. I know that's probably in the works, and so there could be some cost savings there that should be rather dramatic. And then, also if there's an ability to fast track I'm not going to get this right, the combined activities licensing classification that's proposed for 2026, there could be cost savings. So I'm just looking at, is there an opportunity while we are increasing potentially these DCC licensing fees to reduce costs elsewhere so that the industry, can gain some footing again. So those are some quick thoughts I had.
Thank you, Member Beck. We are furiously taking notes during this whole conversation, and this is most definitely part of the overarching evaluation that we will be working with an economist on.
Another one of the thoughts that I'd like to just bring up is there the opportunity or to rethink the opportunity of using tax revenue to help offset some of these potential increased costs? Like, is there a way to, kind of blend the two? I don't know what that process necessarily would look like, but if we're putting everything on the table to evaluate what we need to do, it would make sense that we also look at maybe reevaluating that tax structure and what those taxes go towards also to help compensate so that it doesn't necessarily increase the fees across the entire industry operators.
I think I'd chime in on a couple of things here on top of that. So maybe the DCC can take into consideration having some of the licensing cost, which they're allocating the cost to, paid for by taxes, because it looks like the way that the taxes are broken up, that it's a 60% goes to youth and prevention, intervention treatment, 20% goes to environmental restoration, and then 20% goes to public safety, criminal justice reform. Maybe there's a way to allocate some of the taxes to cover some of these costs, because ultimately those costs, yes, get passed on to the customer, but that in turn has an effect on sales, lowering our overall basket size because people are buying on the same budget that they were before, or probably even a lesser budget. And then to go back to the metric part, it looks like Metric gets paid $28.4 million each year for monitoring our cannabis actions. It seems like a lot of money, but I don't run the Metric company. It looks like it's based out of Florida, so they have their own financial interest to keep this money machine rolling for them. But I do see that's a very large amount of money, and I would imagine that it can be run more efficiently. And I agree with one of the other panelists about if we were to remove some of that metric tagging workload, it would definitely decrease the amount of interactions that we would have with our metric data input, and then obviously metric itself would have a lot less monitoring if we were going to batch tagging, and I'm a huge supporter of that.
And I think, Member Levine, also to that point, I think that I'd like to remind people that agenda item number 7 is making suggestions for future agenda items. And so hearing what the public comment was earlier, as well as some of the comments that we hear now amongst members, I'd like to bring that up again in agenda item number 7 to add that to the agenda here in 2025 so that we can discuss exactly some of these specifics and see if we can't work through that. I think that would be a reasonable next step approach, especially to the metric tagging, which we heard loud and clear, not only from community, but also some of our members as well. Because time is money, right? The amount of time it takes us to tag all these plants. That's a reality of on the cultivation side and through the entire supply chain. So I think that would be a good item, agenda item for agenda item number 7. Any other comments amongst members regarding the evaluation of licensing fee structures? I've got one more comment that I'll just mention, and I guess again, as a licensed cultivator coming from the cultivation side, I think that to take a look at the square footage, like a dollar per square foot, not an actual dollar, but like the cost per square foot, because as an example, my family farm is less than 5,000 square feet, but I pay for a 5,000 square foot license, and so my cost per square foot is a little bit on the higher side because we're not cultivating the maximum of 5,000. So I think that looking at a fee structure where you are licensed by your local jurisdiction for a very specific square footage, they come out and they will measure it, right? And so I think that having a cost fee structure based on the exact square footage that you're cultivating rather than a range would be helpful in identifying a very specific cost on the cultivation side. That would be one recommendation that I'd like to make personally as a licensed cultivator to the group.
The only thing I find an issue with that, which I'd love to reduce it, is we've had fails, and when you have a failed crop, you're still paying based on that. If it were a goes to gross receipts, it would be more economical for the cultivator you know, I don't know if that works with the cost being allocated for, you know, metric, but I mean, definitely there are many farms that are not producing in all of the areas, and they also have a product that doesn't get taken to market. So most people are operating at a loss.
I definitely hear that. I guess the enforcement of that would be pretty challenging, I would think, based on revenues versus on square footage. I would think, I don't know. In my mind, rather than opening my books to potential enforcement actions, it seems like the square footage is just a cleaner way to do it when it's all documented through your county jurisdiction and your state license. Is just my personal thought.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say to that, you know, until there's a stable market out there, I don't see, I mean, I think it would almost cost your auditor, controller, treasurer, tax collector more time and resources to go to adjusting the tax each year to match the market when it comes to gross receipts. And, you know, in Sonoma County, we definitely do things by square footage, and we also spend time working with growers to you know, accurately measure canopy and respond to issues of disease, pest outbreaks, and crop failures in those circumstances, so that the grower ends up getting assessed for what they're actually able to take to market. You know, when we talk about failed crops and we talk about contaminants and you know, processing, that's after the crop's been harvested and isn't necessarily you know, something that the licensing or permitting jurisdiction should be responsible for addressing. Just my position on the subject.
To confirm, we are talking about licensing fee, not taxes though, right?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Brandon. I was referring to taxes, and I know, yeah, licensing fees do need to reflect the scale to which people are going to be producing the cannabis. Yeah, agree there.
All right. Well, do we have any more comments or any more discussion amongst members? Last chance before we move to public comment. All right. Well, hearing none, I think at this point, moderator, let's go ahead and open the floor for public comment regarding agenda item number 5, evaluation of licensing fee structures.
All right, thank you. And so we will do so. If you'd like to make a comment on agenda item number 5, please raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon next to your name if you've logged onto the meeting, or by pressing star 3 into the meeting. I'm going to send you a request to unmute. We're going to go back to the old way for the rest of this meeting today. All commenters will have 2 minutes to speak with a 30-second warning, and we'll have 1 opportunity to speak on this agenda item. Please keep your comments limited to this agenda item. And with that, we'll go to our first commenter, which is Craig Alpenglow Farms. Craig, you should have gotten a request to unmute. There you go.
Good morning. This is Craig Johnson from Alpenglow Farms. My wife and I own and operate a homestead that has a cannabis license on it here in Southern Humboldt. We're known as a 1.0 license in California, meaning we're one of the originals. And the fee structure, in my mind, is not appropriate, and the fee was based on a 2016-17 market. And if we were to roll that over, we need approximately an 80% reduction. So instead of a fee of being $4,800 for my farm, it should be about 960 or so. But to that as well, it's at this point, we're just renewing every year. We just hit renew. Nothing's changing. We haven't changed anything on our farm. So why are we paying for a full license fee for a simple renewal? If we were to look at an industry that literally feeds our children, dairy, that is a 2-year license for $25. How they tag their animals, they go down to the local feed store, buy some ear tags and tag their animals and keep track of their own animals. We really, really need to bring some relief to this industry. And I think we're going to need to look at organizing as a
30 seconds.
community, as a state, and bring this to Gavin Newsom's front door, to his steps, because we can't do this a little too late. We need to react now and today. And one point on revenue, a lot of our revenue is spread over 2 to 3 years from the time we plant the seed to the time we actually collect revenue, or not even. So that's where the revenue problem or process would not even work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, Abe, I've sent you a request to unmute. You're on.
Okay,
Yeah, go ahead.
thank you. I wanted to speak to the processor license and of course to the scheduling fee. I'm a 50,000 square feet license and a processor out of Nevada County. We started off as a 10,000 with a processor. I tried to increase this year another 5,000. And unfortunately, I don't have money to renew it. So I have to decrease down to 10,000 because the cost, the pound it doesn't cover the cost anymore. Now on the processor is always getting the short side of the stick. The last round of improvements, we didn't get none of it. And now I have to pay $10,000 to renew it, and it has to be tiered based on income, as it is for distributors. Now, it doesn't make sense. Me, a small farm, paying 10,000, same price as a large processor with a 5 million gross income are paying the same price. We have to change the structure, and it has to be done as soon as possible. Thank you.
Diana Gamson, I just sent you a request to unmute.
Good day, Diana Gamzon here, Executive Director with the Nevada County Cannabis Alliance. And wholesale prices for outdoor flower have dropped by nearly 80% since the licensing fees were initially set in 2017. So it is very, very drastic, the amount that our small farmers here in Nevada County have to pay compared to the money that they are bringing in for the sale of their cannabis. So we are definitely looking forward to being engaged in this process as recommendations and analysis is done over this upcoming year, and that the fee should be proportional to what the market is. And one thing that we have here in Nevada County is the ability to increase our canopy. However, it's not proportional to the license fee structure. For example, larger type 5 cultivators have the ability to increase their cultivation square footage in 2,000 square foot increments. However, that option doesn't exist for smaller farmers. If we are to increase our canopy, we must apply for a new license, new application, new license to increase our canopy. So in Nevada County, many of our farmers can grow close to 15,000 square feet, but that would require getting 2 licenses. So we are asking for the ability to increase our canopy with in an incremental amount that is proportional.
30 seconds.
In addition, the ability to have incentives for farmers that are cultivating with environmentally sustainable or regenerative practices would be something that we would recommend as well. I know that this is done in many other industries, so we would look for that to be included in the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, Marissa, ETA, I just sent you a request to unmute.
Yes, hi, thank you. I apologize for my voice. I am significantly under the weather right now, but I wanted to contribute to this conversation. I believe that at this time, small licenses are paying more per square foot than the larger licenses, and the market just can't sustain this anymore. Some of my clients are dropping out of the business completely because they just can't afford to keep renewing every year. And now that there is a 20% license fee cost for fallowing, when you fallow, you have to maintain all of your other agency permits, your wastewater discharge, you pay CDFW, you pay, the county, and now you have to pay the state too, to not grow, not bringing in anything whatsoever. And that's not equitable for people to continue. Beyond that, I think it needs to be in a tiered fashion, because I have cultivators that, they pay for a medium license. They have up to an acre of square footage, but they can't afford to plant all of that. And so they want to reduce it to, say 12,000 square feet, but that doesn't save them a single penny in licensing fees, because a 12,000 square foot license is paying the same fee right now as an acre. And so I think in restructuring, we need to evaluate how license fees are assigned to smaller cultivators versus larger cultivators. And if we implemented the same tier structure that large licenses get across
30 seconds.
for all cultivators, it would be more equitable for everyone to be able to afford. And lastly, I would say that increasing of license fees in this market is just not sustainable at all. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Jesse Hill. There you go.
Thanks for the opportunity to contribute to this discussion. Really appreciate it. I'm also a small scale cultivator in Humboldt County, 10,000 square foot and below permit size. And I want to agree with the last several speakers in that we really need to consider restructuring and reducing the license fee, especially for smaller scale cultivators, which are paying more per square foot than larger cultivators, therefore de-incentivized. And also that fee structure was based on a much different market price per pound. And it seems fairly obvious to me and to those small legacy cultivators in our region, as well as many other of the longest running cannabis production regions in the state, that we have not been prioritized and are not being given a fair price structure. And I would just also like to point out that while I'm not familiar with the price structure of indoor license fees in other counties, I believe in Humboldt County it's $3 a square foot, whereas outdoor cultivation is $1 per square foot. Or am I getting this confused with the county fees? In any case, I believe that
30 seconds.
Indoor cultivation has such a larger environmental impact, is much less sustainable, much larger carbon footprint. And if anyone was to be, hit with larger cultivation fees, it should be the indoor cultivation industry, therefore incentivizing both environmental practices and sustainability in the state of California, which does value these. And I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. All right, Ross Gordon, I've sent you a request. There you go, Ross.
Ross Gordon with Origins Council. Really appreciate the discussion by the committee and the opportunity from the DCC to have this conversation. We submitted a letter and analysis ahead of this meeting. Hopefully you all have had some time to review. And want to echo a number of the comments made by other speakers. 4 of the recommendations in that letter. First is a dramatic reduction in cultivation licensing fees to account for market conditions. Second, to address the inequitable licensing fees between smaller and larger cultivators. Third, to allow smaller farmers to incrementally increase their size, which is something that larger farmers currently have the opportunity to do. And fourth, to allow processing and nurserying licenses to be tiered based on size and their annual fees. So I think that that's what we'd like to see in terms of recommendations, but I wanted to take more the bulk of my time to talk about what I think the importance of sort of level setting and grounding this conversation in the reality and the analysis of what the licensing fee distribution is. And so along with our comment, we also submitted an Excel spreadsheet with an analysis of how licensing fees look proportionally, depending on what type of licensee you are. I don't know if committee members have had a chance to look at that. If not, I would ask, happy to provide that as well. And what that analysis finds is that with the current, dramatic collapse in wholesale prices for cannabis flower, most small farmers are paying about 3% of their annual revenue or more to their licensing fee. Larger cultivators are paying about 2%. Manufacturers and retailers are paying maybe 0.75%, and distributors are paying maybe just 0.25%. So under current market conditions, small cultivators are paying between 4 and 10 times more as a proportion of their gross revenue in these licensing fees. If we were in 2017, it would look a lot more equal, but prices have changed so dramatically that it's a very different situation. We also find in that analysis that larger cultivators are paying 32 cents a square foot in licensing fees, whereas smaller cultivators are paying 48 cents per square foot or more. So I know we're early in the conversation, and as this continues, I just hope that type of analysis would really be at the center of any discussion about equitable fee distribution. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, John Foley sent your request.
I'm a farmer here in Nevada County. I also serve as the board chair of the Nevada County Cannabis Alliance. I would just echo so far what all my colleagues have said. I mean, I think the boots on the ground reality of what is needed and what needs to be changed is obvious. I would also just make a suggestion of, due to the nature of this business, of how farms are paid, if they're paid, that there be a payment plan option for your license fees without interest, whether it be quarterly or monthly, to help spread those costs across your annual revenue cycle, as opposed to one lump sum at usually an inopportune time. I would also like to suggest that while the DCC is researching this licensing restructure, it also incorporate in the implementation of SB 1064, which just passed. The multiple license incorporated into one license. Here in Nevada County specifically, we have many farms that have to hold multiple licenses due to different cultivation styles or limitations on square footage. And being able to incorporate multiple licenses into one would not only be logistically easier on the farm, but in theory, it should lower the cost of doing business for the DCC by streamlining the process and not having to review multiple licenses. That's all I got for today. Thank you. Appreciate this process, and hopefully some meaningful changes can happen.
Thank you. All right, Sebastian, I've sent you a request.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for taking the time. Again, this is Sebastian. I'm in Nevada County with Foothill River Farms. I'm also co-chair of the Compassion Committee with the Nevada County Cannabis Alliance. I agree with a lot of things that have already been said, and I'm going to reiterate some of those quickly. I urge the state to adopt a more equitable fee structure for small cultivation license holders with special incentives for those with sustainable and organic practices, such as the OCal certification and or the Sun and Earth certified. As we've heard, smaller operators face disproportionate costs compared to larger licensees, which really undermines our sustainability and equity in the market. The current market's a race to the bottom, whereas small operators who already lack the tools and economies of scale, which are available to larger operators, we're being left behind. Past decisions from the DCC and regulations, such as the removal of the 1 acre cap and the exclusion of small operators' ability for the license conversion process, have further compounded these challenges. At present, larger operators enjoy a 33% cost advantage in their cultivation fees. And instead of maintaining this imbalance, I propose to actually reverse it. Let's grant small cultivation licensees a 33% discount to help level the playing field. The shift
30
would
seconds.
create opportunities for smaller operators to thrive and align with the state's goal, the DCC's goal of supporting a sustainable and equitable industry. So again, finally, let's stop asking small operators to shoulder an unfair burden. Instead, let's provide the support they need to compete and contribute meaningfully to our market. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Sequoia Hudson. There you go.
Hello?
Yeah, you're on, Sequoia.
Perfect. Hi, good morning. Thank you very much for having this important conversation and allowing the time to talk here. I have just a few thoughts that have come up in my mind over this conversation and hearing everybody talk. One of the main things, though, is that I feel like in these conversations, there's a lot of questions about like what money's being spent on. I haven't yet seen an actual expense report or revenue report that has line items itemized for us to be able to see where money has been spent and on what. And I'd like to request to see a itemized actual expense and revenue report, as well as a projected budget report. I don't know if this is the venue to request that or how we get that. I think it would be important to maybe be in a agenda packet for this conversation because it's super relative, but also just in general. So I'd like to ask that. And then there are a couple other things. There was some mention about like different ways that this thing can be restructured. And I know that's the conversation that we're having to come up with some ideas. And I don't know whether like by revenue or by square footage is the best idea. This is something that's kind of being evaluated and rethought at this point. But I do want to remind us that if it is by receipts or sales, it's not that difficult of a thing to manage or audit, that this information is readily available through the State Board of Equalization. We're all required to make either monthly, quarterly, or annual sales reports, whether there's tax or not, at every
30
level of
seconds.
the supply chain. So I think that's something where that information would be available. And I do also want to say too that there's a risk involved in calculating on revenues almost for any of these licenses, but specifically ones like processing, where you're not actually making any money, but it's a super high revenue generating activity. So I think that that's something we need to consider in creating these tiers, is making sure that there's even the I guess profits as a general term to cover the cost of a license in that structure, because they're not really generating any profits. And so where does
Thank
that
you.
money come from?
Rashawn Riordan sent you a request.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Hi. Good morning. My name is Rashawn Riordan, and I'm with Greenleaf Labs. We're an analytical laboratory. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to my comment. I just wanted to share that cannabis businesses, especially the smaller ones, are really struggling in this market. Raising the fee is going to continue putting pressure on smaller businesses that are less capitalized. We really request that the fees be lowered or stay the same. And we also request that payment plans or our options for license fees, regardless of the fee structure. It isn't equitable to put these additional fiscal pressures on small cannabis businesses that are already struggling. We've seen a lot of our clients go out of business this year and last year, and to put this type of pressure is just going to be really sad to see like some of these legacy and smaller businesses not be able to compete and survive. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we are continuing to take public comment on agenda item number 6. Please raise your hand if you have a, oh, there we go. Drew Plabani, I've sent you a request.
Good morning again, everyone. Drew Pavani, Cannabis Division Director for the County of Trinity. Two comments on this general topic that I'd like to share with you all. One, in kind of looking through resources that were available to me on the internet, I came across a 2023 article in Cannabis Business Times about, SB 622, and according to this article, it says that in 2022, 43 million plant tags were issued to cultivators and micro businesses, with a total cost to the state of $15 million. So clearly implementing that legislation would reduce the overhead to the DCC in terms of, the existing practice of as many free tags as you want, you get. It would reduce the cost to the tune of, $10+ million. So that seems significant in terms of the overall costs to maintain the existing operations of the DCC. Secondly, I'd like to bring up, the science review process. One of the comments that myself and staff have made to DCC staff members in the past related to science amendments, is that, well, now in the current paradigm where, at least in the case of Trinity County, we are the lead agency for CEQA, it seems inefficient at least, and perhaps totally inappropriate, that the DCC accepts science amendments for projects that have been approved by a lead
30
agency,
seconds.
not as themselves. So I've had some questions for DCC staff about that, but generally, I think that there could be some great efficiencies created in revisiting exactly what the science review requirements for DCC license renewals and approvals are. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we are continuing to take comment on agenda item number 5. If you have a comment on this agenda item, please raise your hand. All right, Chair Vasterling, it's looking like we do not have any more comment on agenda item number 5.
Well, thank you, everybody, for your comments. With the comment section closed, I wanted to thank everybody, the CAC, for your comments as well. And as noted by Deputy Director Campion, it sounds like the DCC is still just in this initial stage of gathering input and information regarding an evaluation of the licensing fee structure. If anybody wants to make a motion, I'm open to hearing it, but in my opinion, I feel like maybe we should wait for more information from the DCC, which sounds like will be happening early 2025, with some more specifics that we can actually make motions that might have more impact. That's just my opinion. If other people feel differently and want to make a motion, I'm happy to hear those motions at this time.
But in what exactly were we making a motion on?
Well, it would be all regarding the licensing fee structure. If there were specifics that you wanted to make a motion on for what has been discussed today, I guess. Which is still pretty vague. There haven't been a lot of specifics, which is why I guess my recommendation in hearing things would be to push any motion requests into the next meeting in which we're discussing these licensing fee structures.
Yeah, I think that we would need to see a little bit deeper into the accounting and the economic impact it has on the operators. One, at the current fee structure, and two, what that looks like if they're recommending increasing the fees. For us to make an educated decision, we probably should have some of that information. I would imagine it would make it easier for everybody to say, hey, this is justifiable and there's no way around it, or hey, this is an area where we can look at things to improve it.
I agree. Does anyone else have any comments regarding? All right, well, hearing none, let's go ahead and close agenda item number 5. As discussed earlier, agenda item number 6 will be postponed until a future meeting. And so we will now move on to agenda item number 7, which is future agenda items. And so to that point, I'd like to go ahead and open it to our CAC members. If there's any specific agenda items, this is something that I think is important for us to have feedback on. If there are specific agenda items for future meetings in 2025, I'd like to go ahead and open the floor to our CAC members to request future agenda items on any particular topics.
Through the chair, last meeting, we talked with Department of Pesticide Regulations, and they were going to share more details about their proposed list of products acceptable for cannabis. And then they were also going to share with us their rationalization for their surrogate of tobacco and watermelon as references for residues. And they also had talked about the levels of residue that would be the trigger for a pass or fail. And they mentioned during that discussion that they would share more information with us to offer more details so that we could actually make a motion similar to what we're talking about today. We need more information before we can make a motion. And, we haven't heard anything back from DPR through DCC about that. And so I just want to keep that topic of pesticide use in the regulated market as a topic that we still need more clarification on if we're going to offer any meaningful motions or advice to DCC, especially as they work to decide on regulations moving forward and how pesticide use will be captured and covered in that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know if this is the right place for this, but to add to the future agenda, I would hope that it would have been, addressed before now, is the big issue that everybody's brought up is the metric tagging, batch tagging. How do we fast track that? Looks like it's a kind of a common interest, and that would help with the situation, the licensing fees and all that as well. So I think you get more than one benefit out of fast tracking that, especially with this planting season coming on board, where everybody is already extremely challenged and have had a lot of layoffs. I will find it difficult for a lot of these operators to be able to actually handle that workload. So is that something we put on the future agenda, or how do we move that forward? Putting it at the top of the list.
Yeah, thank you, Member Levine. I agree with you. I think that the implementation of SB 622, which is the metric tagging, I think that we should add that to the first meeting of 2025 to review at the CAC meeting and get public comment and figure out a solution to that, because I heard that loud and clear as well.
Yeah, and through the chair, I would agree with Brandon on this, that if the legislation is adopted, pretty sure that legislation would create a pathway to make those actions active January 1 of the following year. And so I think that is something that we could actually make a motion on now to expedite rulemaking for any regulations related to the need to tag individual plants or batches. That might be something we want to just make a motion on today, given the legislation has been signed and it's really a matter of the rulemaking process to adjust regulations to reflect that.
Is that something we can do today?
I'd have to ask for some support from our moderator and our DCC team. Is that something that is able to be made a motion on? It's not currently on the agenda, But is that something that we are able to do?
Give us a moment, please, and we will let you know. Hold on.
I think given the sense of urgency with the planting season coming up, it'll also help operators schedule out their labor force and budgeting for the year. It will be a substantial savings, and even with that substantial savings, it's still going to be extremely tough for operators to stay in business and continue to pay taxes ultimately. So for me, it's extremely urgent to move forward, even though planting season doesn't come until, you know, April, May, whatever. Planning started, you know, last year, right? Or this year, the year before. So it's however fast we can get this in motion, or some clarity to the rest of the cultivators out there is, okay, we're moving it forward and it's likely to come into effect. That would be a good information to have.
Thank you so much, Chair and members. This is Deputy Director Jacqueline Campion. Just wanted to chime in and say, hear the suggestions and recommendations loud and clear. Very much appreciate that. Unfortunately, as this is not an item on the agenda per Bagley-Keene, we cannot make a motion on this at this time. However, happy to continue the discussion with the chair to put this on an agenda for a future meeting. Thank you.
So that would be my recommendation, to get it on the next meeting if time permits and the process allows.
Great, thank you. I agree. So I think that request has been heard loud and clear. I'm sure we'll probably hear it again when we open up to public comment. But before we do that, I want to make sure that we all comments and CAC members have the opportunity to speak, to request any future agenda items that they'd like to see.
I'd like to go ahead and just echo what everyone said right now about the metric tagging. So I'm in 100% agreement and look forward to having that conversation. The other thing that I was going to seek, if it is appropriate to be put on a future agenda, would be what I referenced earlier about the expediting the combined activities licensing activity. Excuse me, licensing classification. So if that's, I believe it's slated for like a 2026, but I'm just curious if there's any, you know, fast tracking that can be done or conversations that can be had to prioritize that. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
And then maybe another future agenda item would be evaluating the financials for, you know, DCC's cost, such as metric, and then licensing fees. So I don't know if that has to be on a future agenda item or if that's something provided to us, and then we make other recommendations. But if it is something that we look at a future agenda, I would recommend we do that as well.
Agreed, thank you. Yeah, I'm tempted even to suggest a subcommittee related to that we could maybe do a much deeper dive on it, so that it doesn't take up, because I feel like when we get into numbers, there's going to be a lot of like going down into the weeds and things that could take a meeting like this where we have multiple agenda items. But maybe if we're focused on that for a subcommittee meeting, that to me makes sense to do something like that. So
I'd be for that. I'd love to be on the subcommittee. You know, I'm a numbers person and feel like I understand the industry very well. So I would love to be a part of that process.
So moderator, is that something that we can make, that I'm able to make a motion on currently? Is have a subcommittee specifically for this evaluation of licensing fee structure that would include looking at more specific numbers as they become available in 2025?
Thanks, Chair Vasterling. We are not able to make a motion on this as it's not on today's agenda. However, the ability to establish subcommittees is within the authority of the chair. So we can certainly continue that conversation and establish subcommittees to do a deeper dive as needed.
Excellent. Thank you.
Chair Vasterline, I have one more, if I may.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm not, again, not totally positive on the language on this, but considering I have some concerns over farm worker labor availability in the upcoming administration, and I'm curious if there's a agenda item here to have the DCC or consider or the state, I'm not sure, to consider new regulations that would like codify our support for farm workers in the cannabis industry and prohibit local law enforcement from requiring criminal background checks for frontline agricultural workers. So there are local ordinances, cannabis ordinances that are still requiring criminal background checks of farm labor. And I'm just curious if there's a way to look at this that would again protect our farm labor.
Great. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
All right. So before we move on to public comment, any last suggestions or recommendations by our CAC members? Okay, hearing none. Moderator, can we please open the floor for public comment or for suggestions on future agenda items, please?
You bet. So we are now taking public comment on agenda item number 7. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon next to your name or by pressing *3 if you've called into the meeting. All commenters will have 2 minutes to speak with a 30-second warning, and we'll have 1 opportunity to speak on this agenda item. So let's begin here with Craig. I've just sent you a request to unmute.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. And I want to bring up a choke point or a limiting factor that has become awfully challenging as we're moving our product through the supply chain. And that is the retail limits. Just about every time we do a in-store retail activation, we have to turn consumers away, not turn them away, but we have to pull jars out of their hand, which is just crushing. 1 ounce is not nearly enough product for someone to take home. If we were to look at alcohol or some of these other types of products, you could literally walk into the grocery store and fill a cart and walk out. 1 ounce is just way too little for that. And time and time again, I see people coming in on a Friday when we do our activation. They're all excited. They're going to have a dinner party, some guests over for the weekend, and just like they're wine shopping, it's really similar, the process. They choose their terpene profiles they want to share with their guests, etc. And they'll pull the different cultivars of sun-grown, and then at the cash register, we have to pull jars out of their hand. And we have enough limits. We don't have direct to consumer sales. We really need to pull that stop point out. So thank you for the time to speak, and please consider putting that on a future agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, John Tan Svetko. I apologize if I tortured your name. There you go.
Very good. Good morning, everyone. Jonathan Svetko here, Executive Director for UCBA. I would like for everyone to potentially consider looking at the current regulations around delivery. Delivery has been heavily impacted as the market keeps fluctuating, and there are certain arbitrary limitations that have been put in place, such as limits on how much product they can carry. Also, the 30-minute return rule that if they don't get an order, they need to come back to base entirely for that, before they can go out for another order from there. We would also like to recommend potentially looking at the potential positive impacts of increasing the time of sales. If not necessarily increasing it past 10 p.m., then at least allowing orders for delivery that are received before 10 p.m. to be delivered up to at least a certain reasonable amount of time. But I would definitely like to ask for the committee to consider the limitations that are currently placed in delivery. Also understanding that as the state still struggles to bring online retail and we bring more in there, we should be looking at policies that are more friendly to allow for faster, safer access through delivery services while we still wait for storefronts and others to come online. Thank you very much.
All right, Marissa.
Yes, thank you. I just want to agree with the CAC members who have asked for metric tagging to be placed on the next meeting agenda. I do believe since this agenda, we are discussing license fees and restructuring. It's been brought up the cost of how many metric tags, millions of metric tags that go out, and the significant cost to licensees to have to tag their plants. And I think is a very valuable discussion before we move much further in the process of restructuring license fees to try and eliminate that huge cost burden to the DCC. I feel like if we reduce that cost, then we won't have to increase license fees. So putting it on this next agenda to discuss implementation as quickly as possible is very important. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Shannon Taliaferro. Shannon? There you go. Now we can, yes.
Okay. Thank you for the time to call in today. I appreciate all the members on board, and I appreciate this lively discussion. I'd like to talk a little bit about, or have the ability to add a future agenda item having to do with pricing structure of retail. I'd like to, start the conversation around a tax credit or a carbon credit when it comes to sun-grown, and the same thing on the other side when it comes to indoor cultivation, a tax on carbon use. And so I'm not exactly sure what that would look like as an agenda item, but somehow to level the playing field when it comes to sun-grown and indoor at the retail level. So it just seems that California is moving in a direction of reducing overall carbon footprint, and it seems that the indoor world is running rampant with carbon use. So I'd like to move that we see some attention put towards that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, Sequoia Hudson.
Yeah, hi, good morning again. Thank you. I'm not clear on if this would be something that's part of this current conversations with licensing fee restructuring, or if it's part of a different conversation, because I know there's already something happening with the licensing restructuring, not necessarily the fees, but like the consolidation. I don't know if that conversation is happening within this body to make recommendations or consider, or where that's actually happening. So I'm just going to put it out here. Just some simple things in regards to license restructuring that needs to be discussed. And that's like, there's language that prevents certain activities from being included in a consolidated license. Like processing can't be included in a micro license only because somebody decided that, licenses created by the agencies couldn't be included. So considering that, considering what types of other things in the restructuring, what makes sense. Again, I don't know if this conversation is happening in this body or not, so I wanted to bring it up about the actual restructuring, not just the fee restructuring. And that's really it right now. Thank you.
All right, great, thank you. And Abe sent you a request to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, loud and clear.
All right. I wanted to suggest for future agenda items regarding enforcement, the enforcement division at the DCC. I'm looking, I just feel that there's no transparency. What is their agendas? What are they enforcing? Who are they enforcing? I just feel that this information needs to be brought in front of the CAC and in front of the other people in the industry. I can talk for hours about things that are not getting enforced in this industry. I mean, anywhere you look, you could throw a rock on it and you'll see an area where there's no enforcement. And I think we deserve it to know what is the enforcement division doing, and sending every 2 months a message to the newspaper really doesn't do much. And that also comes into costs. Where how much does it cost to enforce or things that they're doing now? And you know, where's the areas on enforcement where it needs it the most? And I feel like we don't have that, never seen anything like that. So if that could be added as an agenda in the future, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we are continuing to take public comment on agenda item number 7, which is for future agenda items. Please raise your hand if you have anything to contribute to future agenda items. All right, Chair Vasterling, it looks like we have no more comment on this agenda item. Would you like to close it?
Yes. Please, moderator, if you could please close the comment section. Thank you, everybody.
All right, it is done.
Great. Well, thank you all for your suggestions, and we will certainly keep this in mind as we start building out the agendas for 2025. With that, let's go ahead and move on to the last agenda item, which is adjournment on agenda item number 8. I just wanted to personally thank all of the DCC and CAC members, as well as members from the public, for all of your comments and input today. I wish you all a happy and safe holiday season, and I look forward to a lot of positive changes here in 2025. So thank you all.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.